All right, so why don't we get started? This is the third lesson in the series, The Life of Jacob. But now we're at a point really in the 26th verse, 26th chapter of Genesis, where there's really nothing in the chapter about Jacob, but it really is an important chapter regarding his life and his family. So the chapter basically, Kaplan calls it Isaac and the Philistines as a subtitle. And basically, I'm going to teach this chapter in two lessons. And we just came off of Isaac, Esau surrendering his birthright to Jacob. And then at the end of the last chapter, it says that the boys grew up, right? So I really don't know how many years that is and what that exactly means. There's a lot of commentary and guesses as to what that means exactly. But now we're into a phase where there's a famine in the land, and and God tells Isaac not to. He was planning on going to Egypt. So the first instruction here is he's told, "Don't go to Egypt. Remain as an immigrant in this land," quote unquote. Not going to Egypt. This is again earlier than Moses, right? So this is before the whole Red Sea thing. But Egypt, Mitzrayim, meant the same thing to Isaac as it meant to anybody in Moses' time, which is narrow and constrictedness, right? Mitzrayim means that narrow, sort of judgmental, regimented way of thinking. So on a deeper level, certainly on the surface level, he's saying, don't go back to the physical Egypt. But on a deeper level that we're looking at these things in terms of our consciousness and the battlefield of consciousness and growing in enlightenment, he's being told, don't go back to narrow thinking. So that's a part of the instruction of the whole chapter. But also, if we read the chapter, and I'm not going to read it, you guys can read it anytime you want. If you read the chapter, it talks about Isaac and his journey exactly like almost a carbon copy of the way Abraham's life unfolded, right? So you can match it up. It's like a carbon copy. And this is another instruction. This is the instruction of a continuum. The continuum is very important in Kabbalah, in the Torah, and in any kind of mysticism, even in the Veda. So we always have a continuum where the past, that flow of consciousness, and those teachers are honored through the next generation and the next generation, particularly in mishpahas, families like this, but also in larger clans and in groups where there was a special teacher passing on and then going forward. At the beginning of the chapter, we see that the Philistines are not happy with, because Isaac, this is really a chapter of success. You know, there's often being instructed on what not to do to fail and giving an example of it. Chapter 26 really is an example of the success of higher consciousness. So there's a famine, and Isaac's told, don't go back to Egypt. Don't go back to narrow thinking. You've got yourself on the right path here. And he settles in Gerar, which is a border town to the Holy Land. And that's significant in that he's told, stay there, be an immigrant, be in wandering, be in uncertainty, live in that space, and continue to grow spiritually, right? So, and as such, he's still dealing with the Philistines. So within himself and outside of himself. The real hero of this story is Revkah, right? And it goes all the way back. I mean, it goes back through the family history to Abraham, right? So Abraham was a man of great kindness and charity. And all of the Torah lets us know that, but it's also in the Midrash and the Talmud. He invited everyone to his tent. He invited people to come, strangers. He was always uplifting, was never exclusive in his teaching. Only thing he ever requested was that gratitude be given to the Creator. So people would come from all over. He would invite them to learn. He would invite them to eat and be with him. He was a man that was born on what we call the right side of wisdom, Hakmah, and Chesed, mercy. And he lived that way. That was his being. That was his natural state. And he drew Sarah into that, and they had a wholeness, a sort of left-right wholeness. And obviously that created a beautiful clan that went on, and he taught and he taught and he taught. One example of that is he's in his tent meditating, and three strange men come. And the strange men, he doesn't know who they are, but he goes to them, he bows down to them in a traditional act of kindness. He has all kinds of food for them, and he brings them in. Little did he know that they were angels, and they had three different missions, but I'm not going to get sidetracked into that. But one of their missions was Sodom and Gomorrah, and he interceded for Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's another sort of fruit of the higher consciousness of Hakmah and Chesed. Him and Sarah together made that wholeness, that oneness, and that's the way they were. So they weren't accusers of the people of Shechem, of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, but rather they interceded for those people. And there's a stark contrast between Abraham and his consciousness and the consciousness of the people of Shechem. Not Shechem, I'll keep saying that, Sodom and Gomorrah. Shechem was bad too. But it wasn't about what you'd think it's about, or it was how they treated strangers. And we fast forward to Revkah. So Abraham is getting old. And Abraham, in his life, he needs this balance to come from the opposite way it came to him, because he was naturally from Chesed, and he drew Sarah in, and they made that wholeness. Isaac was naturally from Gevarah. So Abraham was very one who was complete in Chesed, like Abraham was, in kindness and in love and compassion. So he got his best disciple, Eleazar, and instructed him to go to find a wife for his son. That would be that balance. So Eleazar goes with 10 camels, and all is reference to the tree of life and the 10 Sephirot, right? And the camels go and stay next to the well. So that's another reference to that pure consciousness coming from the well of being and going through into the relative, the finest relative of the 10 Sephirah, the 10 Sephirot. So Eleazar is there, and he prays, and he decides that he's going to ask these potential brides for water because he needs water. And of course, they don't know who he is. To them, he's a stranger. And before he's even done praying, Rebekah comes. And Revkah says, do you need water? I mean, you need water. I'll get water for you and your camels. She exhibits an arduous practice of getting this water. And she's a young woman, and she has to gather the water in these big pots, put it on their shoulders or their backs, and bring it to their homes. So usually you'd want to just do that once, right? And not a bunch of times. But she doesn't say to Eleazar, why don't you go get it yourself? She doesn't say, you look like an able-bodied person. Why aren't you doing this for yourself? She says, if you need water, I'll be happy to get it for you. So she's exhibiting those same traits as Abraham. And of course, Eleazar is thrilled and he arranges this and she's willing to go with him to be Isaac's mate, to be Isaac's partner. So this comes together in a beautiful way. So that's going back. Now, this chapter begins with Isaac, and I'm saying Revkah is the hero because the Philistines are sort of that outside resistance. And if we look at it on a deeper level, it's the inside resistance that we have ourselves, right? To crossing those barriers of higher consciousness. So he, like Abraham did before him, he tells the Philistines that Revkah, who was, according to the Talmud, very beautiful, amazingly beautiful, that this is his sister. He doesn't say it's his wife. Now, the general, on the surface, black and white story narrative is that he was afraid that he would be killed. And he says that because everybody wants the beautiful wife, and they might decide, I'll kill Isaac to get his wife. And but on a deeper level, really, it has a very important instruction to us, same way it would have in the day of Sarah, right? So if we go to Shir HaShirim, the most beautiful poem of love and spirituality that I've ever read, and I really highly recommend it over and over and over again. Every time you read it, something deeper pops out to you, and it blends the idea of love and physical love in the spiritual world as well as the world of action, the material world that we live in. But in more than one place, the speaker, the person in love in Shir HaShirim says, "Come into my garden, my sister, my bride." So that's a little bit weird. Either his sister is his bride, or what is he saying? So this goes to the Shekinah. This is something that we haven't really discussed much in this class. But the Shekinah is the female, the divine female. Now, that sounds a little paganistic, but it's not, because we don't think of this as a duality. We think of it as one God, one divine, with multiple characteristics, right? So it's not like at least in Kabbalah, maybe in the Veda it's different, but in Kabbalah, we think of it as the divine consciousness is both masculine and feminine and all of these different things. So the Shekinah is what's considered to be the divine feminine. And its roots, its root comes from the word to be housed, to dwell. And it has two meanings in that regard. And they reference both sister and a wife as a metaphor, right? So the Shekinah dwells in all of us. The divine feminine is in all of us. Man, woman, doesn't matter. In mysticism, we don't look at things in this sort of linear, singularized way. So as men and women, we all have the divine presence dwelling within us. But then there's also the divine Shekinah female outside of us. And that divine female Shekinah is like a wave on the ocean. We never want to think of this as multiple gods, obviously, right? So it's the divine consciousness being channeled into a specific dwelling, a specific place, right? Now, the essence, the divine essence, is in everything. Just like imagine the whole entire sea. But when a wave pops up from the sea, it's a wave and it has the essence of the sea itself, but it's also has its own character. It's this strong, it's this high, it's this wide, it's this deep. And that's the Shekinah. It's the divine feminine dwelling outside and within. So what does this have to do with my sister, my bride? What it has to do with my sister, my bride, is that when we speak of the Shekinah, and this is what Revkah is. Revkah is the Shekinah's divine presence. She's the hero in the story. And she became that way by inclining, as the psalmist says, by inclining to the right, to mercy, to kindness, by being that person who would give water over and over again, not just to Eleazar, but to his camels before she takes it home, right? It's a selfless act of love and kindness. And as that, she represents that divine. So the Shekinah, while it's a feminine characteristic, and while it's thought of as a left side characterization of God, it stands on the right side. So it's that union. And how is it that union? It's the union of the wife. So the union of the sister is there. It's not negotiable. That divine Shekinah is there. Your sister is your sister. She has no choice, right? She doesn't have to be passionately drawn into your garden. She's your sister. No, no, that's not going to change. However she desires or doesn't desire you, doesn't matter. She's just there. She's your sister. Your wife, on the other hand, is that dwelling that's drawn in. So there's desire on both parts. Who's drawing in and who's not drawing in? Not the point. The point is that's a union that happens by desire as opposed to the sister relationship, okay? That is, the dwelling of the Shekinah is. The desire of a person or a righteous person or a righteous people to experience the wave of the Shekinah is what draws it. It's that passion. And that passion is best described, in my opinion, in Shir HaShirim. So I wanted to read a little bit of that before we meditate, if I can find it. This book, this Shir HaShirim is great, but it doesn't have the chapters listed, so, but I have it highlighted, so. A garden enclosed my sister, my bride, a spring, a fountain sealed. Thy shoots are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits. Henna and nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh, and aloes, with all the chief spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, and come thou south. Important instruction there. So if you're standing east, facing east, and you're the Sephirot within yourself, your left is north and your right is south, right? So we think of the Sephirah like that, as we are the tree of life. Our left is north and our right is south. And we're talking about the right drawing in the south. And with the sister, we're talking about it being there in its dwelling place. So awake, O north wind, and come thou south. Blow upon my garden, that the spices thereof may flow out. Let my beloved come into his garden and eat its choicest fruits. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh and my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. Eat, O dear ones, and drink. Drink deep, O loving companions. I sleep, but my heart is awake. This is a beautiful expression of this love and this desire and this union, and also of our meditation, where when we experience those living waters, how we experience those living waters is by that surrender. It says, I sleep, though my heart is awake. That means that our body is asleep, but our awareness, not just our heart, but our awareness internally is awake. We're not dull, we're more expanded. Internally, body sleeping, consciousness fully awake, light still shining. This is what Sarah represented, Sarah and Revkah. Revkah in this case. So this is a fulfillment, chapter 26. And it goes on to talk about this continuum that Isaac had because he experienced this wholeness. His eyes were opened and he was in a state of enlightenment as a result of his union with Revkah. And that union obviously brought forth Jacob and Esau. He begins to drill wells, open the wells of his father that the Philistines had filled back up, and also drill new wells of his own. And that we'll talk about next week.